Group 2 then, perks. Well, what do we want to do? We want to make sure that we're doing our jobs, not just because we get goodies out of it, but because we're good public servants. And so there are things that other people can offer us, and there are things that we get because we just kind of run off with them. And so, you know, I always wonder where these people are that are supposed to be trying to bribe me with meals and things. Sometimes I feel like Tevye in the Fiddler on the Roof. I fling out my Form 700 and it's got this spot for gifts. And it's like, nobody ever gives me gifts. Tevye, the boyfriend of the second daughter in the Fiddler on the Roof tells Tevye, money is the world's curse. And he says, may the Lord smite me with it, and may I never recover. So it's like, you know, why don't I ever have any gifts to report on my Form 700? Where are all these people? May the Lord smite me with it. But, you know, we get to talk about it in the training, so you're probably like me and never get any gifts at all. But there are things we got to think about. Who's giving us gifts? Who's paying for our golf games? Sometimes there's travel things that can go on if you're buying a machine and they want to pay for you to come and look at their fancy road grader or their grave digger thing. So there are things to watch out for on that. And a note on our Form 700s, and this is where the $50 one comes in that I misspoke about earlier, that we do have to disclose on our Form 700s gifts from a single source that accumulate over $50 a year in a calendar year. And then we also, unlike other kinds of things, in the most part, the Political Reform Act says you can have all the outside income, all the outside business investments, all the outside stuff you want, not gifts. If the gifts are relevant to your job under your district's conflict of interest code, then you have a flat limit. There's a ceiling. You cannot accept gifts worth more than the $250 plus inflation, currently $440 in a calendar year. And we also have that rolling disqualification thing where we look 12 months back from the governmental decision. So you could get a $300 gift in November and a $300 gift in February. May the Lord smite me with it. And be disqualified for a governmental decision, but it would still be legal under this limit. Again, we've got some nasty penalties if we violate the rules under the Political Reform Act. All kinds of fun things you can end up having to deal with. I love the remnants of the railroad age in California. I'm from Nebraska. I don't think the Nebraska's Constitution has a provision like this. Never looked. But there's a provision of the California Constitution that says if you accept a free ticket from a transportation carrier, meaning in those days railroad, you forfeit your office. And so they were, obviously trying to get rid of the undue influence of the railroad, but this is actually still relevant. There was an AG opinion where the guy didn't know this law was out there, and it was an airport in Southern California that 3 different cities get together and run. I can't remember which one. If it's the John Wayne Airport or one of those. And they found out he was a city council member and gave him a free upgrade to first class. And so he came back and then happened to be talking about it. The city attorney went ballistic, and he was able to pay it back. The attorney general said, once he found out and paid it back, he was okay. They weren't going to make him forfeit his office, but he just didn't know. And so if you get the high-speed rail people wanting to give you a free ride on the non-existent high-speed rail, if they ever do that, you can't take it. No, I've got to pay for mine. I can't take a free ride from a high-speed rail. There's also limitations if they're relevant to your job for taking an honorarium for a speech or so on. And you can see where people kind of try to hide bribes in this form if it was relevant, but nobody ever wants to pay me to talk to them anyway. Oh. Other than in the course of my job, and I don't see any of that. They just pay the counter. Our nice, good stuff that we don't want to take all the office supplies home and that kind of thing. We don't want to use public resources for our personal benefit. This can, for some people who've gotten convicted of various crimes under California law, there's the classic case of the guy who was a county supervisor, was running for lieutenant governor, was having all of his county staff work on his campaign. Well, he was just shocked when he got convicted of misappropriating public resources. And it's like, well, but they're public employees. No, they're county employees. They're not campaign employees. Not supposed to be doing that kind of stuff. And just in case you were wondering about taking office supplies home, the cartoon says, the camera is mounted on your desk for a reason. There have been some paper clips missing and we think you're the thief. We talked about it earlier under the first part of AB 1234. Your agency should have formal reimbursement policies. You should know what they are and how to work them. And you should not try to charge a little extra things like your spouse or partner. Sometimes my husband goes with me to conferences and goes and plays golf during the day while I'm at the conference. And if you check with, you can check with the hotel and they'll tell you whether there's a different rate for one person or two, and so you can have them separated on the bill and figure it out that way. Although it's nice to know most of the time there's not a difference between one person and two. It's between 2 and 3 that starts. And somehow my daughter never wants to go anywhere. She's too busy doing stuff with her friends. Then of course, there's some nasty violations for bribery and all those kinds of things too. We get some entertaining stories in the political use of public resources. We have public agencies that can end up supporting a particular ballot measure. The leading case in California on how to deal with the inappropriate use of public resources to support or oppose a ballot measure involved a state parks bond. And the state parks director was doing all this stuff that ended up being treated as campaigning rather than providing neutral information. We can provide neutral information, but we can't campaign on one side or the other on that kind of thing, even if it's district bond measuring. Mass mailing restrictions. This isn't as big a deal for us, but remember back in the bad old days, and I'm sure you all still get them from your federal legislators. We used to get them from our state legislators too, these mass mailings about just, random things that are going on in the state legislature that just happen to have my name plastered all over them. And gee, I'm an incumbent who's going to be running for re-election. Well, the voters decided that wasn't such a good idea and put in an amendment to the Political Reform Act that says we're not doing mass mailings at public expense. You can get into trouble with this accidentally. Well, sorry, I forgot to order my slides. This is a little older now, but this was quite a scandal when it happened. We have this First Five Commission, and they get money from something that we approved in an initiative to help kids ages 0 to 5. And so they do a lot of stuff with preschool and whatnot. And each county has its own First Five Commission, but there's a statewide commission too. And so they put out $23 million worth of ads promoting preschool for everybody. And gee, this happened to be at the same time that the chairman of the statewide commission, actor director Rob Reiner, he was gathering signatures for an initiative that would have provided public funds to provide preschool for all kids. Well, was that proper for the First Five people to spend their money on? Well, maybe, because they're supposed to serve kids 0 to 5, so preschool's something they can think about, but is that necessarily something they should have been doing when the guy on their commission was promoting this initiative? Probably not. And he ended up resigning from the political pressure. So who knows, it was probably a pet project of his to do good things for preschoolers, and he ended up losing the opportunity to do that because of this potentially unethical behavior. But the cool story I was going to come up with is another one out of the annotations online on the Fair Political Practices Commission. This is an easy way for a special district to get into trouble. You cannot feature an elected incumbent in something hard copy that's sent to more than 200 people. Now, the county website has pictures of all of our board members, and we have an electronic newsletter that we send that features the board member of the month. But that's okay, it's not a tangible item. If you choose to print that out, that's up to you. There's very good, clear advice from the FBPC on that. So if you've got a website, you can feature elected officials all you want. But the school district got into trouble. They did two different things. They sent a letter to their parents that was signed by and prominently featured the school board president, And then they also sent a mailing that included the photograph and information about 3 of the 5 elected school board members. So the school district ends up paying this $4,000 fine. So that's something to watch out for those districts that have elected board members, is to avoid doing things that feature elected officials. And there's some descriptions in the regs of what constitutes that. Then I've got another case about improper use of public resources. And I asked Lynn to come up with it. The last time I did this training, it was for county employees. As I said, you can designate employees to get the training, and the board finally got around to designating them. So they had designated them, but they decided to do live renewal training because they don't want to take that nitty, boring online training. And so I asked Lynn to come up with some cases of employees acting badly, because most of the examples in the materials you get from the ILG are elected officials and campaign contributions and that kind of stuff. And she came up with this one, it just cracked me up. So this Merced County Deputy Sheriff is working at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he sees in town, in Merced, a repair shop that had left a lawnmower sitting outside. And so he decides to steal this lawnmower, and he puts it in the trunk of his patrol car while he is on duty. Now he's in town, and so the sergeant for the Merced City Police Department happened to drive by, and so he sees the handle of the lawnmower sticking out of the trunk of the patrol car. Didn't that just crack you up? And then he sees Defendant, who of course he recognizes. You know, they're smaller than we are, so the city and county police officials all know each other. And so the sheriff spots him and jumps in the car and takes off. And so, of course, now our city police guy is really curious, and so he follows him, but he loses him. And then later he sees car headlights coming out of an orchard. And so the next day when they go out and they find this lawnmower in the orchard, and the evidence of lawnmower remnants in the trunk of the patrol car. So the sergeant finds the defendant later on that same night and said, "Did you steal that lawnmower?" And of course he says, "What lawnmower?" And I was going to the hospital to interview a rape victim. So needless to say, he was not only convicted of theft, he was convicted of embezzlement, because he was using public resources to steal the lawnmower. Now technically he succeeded in the appeal because he'd been convicted of felony embezzlement, and he did successfully argue that it should have been a misdemeanor because he shouldn't have been charged with the whole value of the patrol car. He should have just been charged with the rental value of the patrol car for the time that he embezzled it. But no, it's just too funny. Google Images is great. This is an image of an actual Merced County Sheriff's deputy car, but it's an old enough case. It's probably not the same car. But naturally, the moral of that is we do want to avoid the excess use of resources and just get the things that we should. A perfect value consists in doing without witness all that we could have done in front of the entire world. Transparency laws. Now, it was very interesting to me when AB 1234 first came out, and I'm looking at these, and they have the kind of standard ethics stuff, financial conflicts of interest, and those sorts of things. And then they throw in government transparency laws, and it's like, this is an ethics training? And it's like, okay, we'll do the training because that's what the statutes say. But it's just kind of interesting to me that the legislature thought of this as part of the ethical behavior of board members and senior staff, that we want to think about being transparent with the public as part of our ethical duty. And I love this cartoon. It's got the politician poking their head out the door too, in this case the media, but it could be to any member of the public saying, "We could get a lot more done if we didn't have to let the public snoop so much." And of course, it's the public's business. It's not our business. They trust a process they can see. The more transparent we can be, as I mentioned with the financial conflicts of interest, you may not be legally obligated to describe your conflict and leave the room, but it sure helps them trust the process if you do. And so what are the kinds of things that go into transparency? Well, the Brown Act. I love this headline that Lynn came up with. Meeting on open meetings is the closest. is so allowing the public to participate in your meetings, allowing the public to look at and get copies of records. And then this other one she found is just hysterical. It's in very small print, so you can't see it. But it describes the public as the mom and the government as the teenager with the cell phone. It said, "Where are you going?" Kid says, "Nowhere." "What are you planning on doing?" "Nothing." "When will you be home?" "Don't worry about it." With the announcement at the bottom of it, this is why we need the Brown Act, to hold us accountable for these sort of things. So what comes into the Brown Act? Nutshell. You've heard these Brown Act presentations before, but all we're going to do is just a very brief nutshell tonight. 2 pieces. Notice to the public, participation by the public. You got that funny little niggle in the back of your mind. Are we providing enough notice to the public about this? Are we providing enough opportunities for the public to participate in this? If there's a little niggle going on, maybe it's time to stop and think about it and see if maybe you want to do a little more. But if you feel like you've done everything you should, go ahead with it. Just because nobody shows up doesn't mean that you didn't provide the opportunity. And I'm sure like most of your board meetings are like the ones that I go to, where most of the time nobody's there when you're doing something important, and if you're doing something really trivial, the room is packed. And so the true importance of the decision tends to be an inverse relationship to the number of people who are upset about it. But a couple other basics. We don't want to get a majority of the board huddling together somewhere away from the public and doing district business. That's basically it. You want to do it in front of the public where they can see you and watch the process. And we don't want to have the serial kinds of communication where board member number 1 talks to board member number 2, and then board member 2 talks to board member 3, and we have 5 board members, so we've just had a majority talk to each other about a topic that should have waited till the board meeting. Bad idea. So we want to try to avoid those kinds of things. Some nasty stuff can happen if you're really trying to violate the Brown Act. It is a criminal misdemeanor, but it's still criminal, and you can have lots of very bad publicity. Newspapers love the Brown Act, and they will say all kinds of nasty things about you if you think you're violating it, as anybody who read the Times Delta saw with the Board of Supervisors here a couple of years ago. All they were doing was having lunch. And you can have attorney's fees as well. But here's a new thing. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the Brown Act because that's boring too. But I did want to tell you that there's one new piece for 2014. Now you have to publicly report any action taken and the voter abstention on that action of each member present for the action. They don't explain at all what they mean by publicly report in the statute. Now, the legislative history is relatively clear that they're only talking about things in open session that actually get voted on. Okay. We're not talking about closed session. There's already special rules for when you have to report votes in closed session. You have to report by teleconference. Votes taken by teleconference have to be roll call vote. So they're not saying you have to do a roll. They're clearly not saying you have to do a roll call vote on every open session item. And they don't say what publicly report means. So we've been having kind of a discussion about it on the County Council Bulletin Board online, and some of us were saying, well, we think it means some kind of oral report, and the other people are saying, well, it's in the minutes, that's good enough. And so we finally came up with that, well, let's kind of do a belt and suspenders approach. So I think that we should do both, have something in the minutes and something orally, and that it just needs to be something that expresses to the people in attendance in a way that explains how the people voted. It was approved unanimously, so that the chairman or the clerk would announce. I mean, that tells you how everybody voted. Or if you have 5 board members and they're all there, it was approved 4-1 with board member so-and-so voting against. That's my suggestion. And we have to do, it says publicly report. I think that means at least oral. And you probably already put it in your minutes anyway. So it may require some changes for your presiding officers in the beginning of the year if you don't already do something like that. But I think it requires something. I don't think it requires a roll call vote, because they know how to say we require a roll call vote in the Brown Act, and they didn't. And as I said, it doesn't apply to closed session. But, so I think we need to get into the practice, if you don't already do this, of reporting after a formal vote in open session, in some manner that gets the people there to understand how each person present for the vote voted. Transparency also includes public records. We had a presentation on this earlier this evening, so I don't need to spend very much time on it. But it does include electronic documents as well as actual hard copies. And the one thing Diana didn't mention is that if you end up in litigation under the Public Records Act and you lose, attorney's fees to the plaintiff are mandatory. They're optional under the Brown Act. They're likely to be awarded, but you have some opportunity under the Brown Act litigation to avoid having to pay attorney's fees. It's a may under that statute. It's a shall in the Public Records Act. So Public Records Act litigation is definitely something to avoid if you possibly can. That's one of the reasons she talked about cooperating with people and making sure you understand what they want and helping them, giving them the impression that you want to help them and provide the information to them, is that you want to avoid litigating under the Public Records Act and those mandatory attorney's fees. And of course, again, the newspapers love going around saying that, oh, this public agency was trying to stonewall us on records. Speaking of which, we have another great cartoon that Lynn came up with here. It's got this woman holding the door of the public records and they're stuffed and trying to come out, and she's squashing the door and saying, no, okay folks, nothing to see here. All the people the taxpayers trying to see what's behind that door. And then, of course, transparency includes those lovely Form 700s that we get every year. And when do we file these? When we start, every year, and then when we leave. Now, here's an important part that a lot of people miss. The first or second page of the instructions says, go look at your agency's conflict of interest code before you fill out this form. Because the form is comprehensive. It includes space for every possible financial interest you could own. Because it covers every state and local public servant in the state of California. Some of them have to report a lot more fully than you do. Go and look at your agency's conflict of interest code. You may not have to report 90% of that form. You only have to disclose things that are relevant. And if you've done it right, your district's conflict of interest code says what's relevant. You might have to disclose property that you own anywhere in the district, but we don't care about property you own on the coast. You don't have to disclose that on this form. Now you might if you're on a statewide commission, but for the district you don't. You might have to report gifts from somebody who's relevant to doing business with the district, but if your main job is with the bank and you got a gift from one of the vendors to the bank, that might not be relevant to your job with the district, to your position on the district board at all. So read the conflict of interest code before you fill out your Form 700. See what you actually have to disclose. Don't think that you have to fill out the whole form just because it's a whole form. The form's for everybody. You just have to fill out the parts that are relevant to your district. And your district should have set in your conflict of interest code what those are. If you can't find your conflict of interest code, you may have to go back and adopt it again, because I found out we didn't keep copies of it when we approved it at the Board of Supervisors. You're supposedly doing that now, but hopefully most of you can find somewhere in your district your conflict of interest code under the Political Reform Act. And again, with transparency, these things are public records. When you file your Form 700, it's a public record. If your home address you don't want to be relevant, list the district's address on the Form 700. It says you can do that. And again, try not to discuss agency business with your fellow decision makers outside the board meeting. The classic way to inadvertently violate this is reply all. The staff sends out a document to the board members and says, please read this by email, and says, please read this and be prepared to discuss it at the next board meeting. And then the board members start emailing each other about the document, saying, no, that's a board meeting. Even discussions count as board meetings. So you need to save that for a time when the public is present. Last little piece we're supposed to talk about is fair process laws. And this is a very interesting topic, again, to include in the ethics training. It's like, oh, that's another interesting section that they put in here, is we're not just talking about standard financial things like bribery and conflicts of interest, and it was odd enough to put in the transparency, but now we're talking about being fair in terms of our procedures. And I love this picture that Lynn came up with. It's got the mama bird, or papa bird, if it's that kind of bird, squashing one baby bird to feed the other one. And we have some really fun cases on this. For those of you who get involved in quasi-judicial matters, where you're applying a set of rules to a particular set of facts, you can get really into trouble with bias. And there's much higher standards. And I did invite the members of the Assessment Appeals Board, who also need to get this training, to come tonight. So this is especially good for them. But for the rest of you, there are occasions where you end up doing things that are more like being a judge than like being a legislature or executive. And the classic time for this in the sort of county government or city government structure is a planning commission. And most of us don't have that kind of parallel, but including it in the training so that you know about it. Judges have different rules from legislators. When you're wearing your regular board member hat, you bring in knowledge from anywhere, and if you're biased, you ran on the platform of you're going to improve the finances of this district, and by golly, you're going to push for, every time there's a financial decision, you're going to push for better records or saving money or whatever it is that is your thing, then you're perfectly free to bring that in to the board meeting. That's your bias. Everybody knows that. That was the platform you ran on. Go for it. And that's why your constituents elected you. But when you're a judge, it's different. You're not supposed to be biased. You're not supposed to bring those personal feelings in. You're supposed to set that aside and judge the situation on its merits within the rules for that kind of situation. And so the first one isn't quite as fun as the second one, but I got two good cases on this. First one in little tiny print on your handout there, it's N-A-S-H-A, and I don't know how it was pronounced. It was Nasha or Nasha, whatever the Nasha. It was a developer that wanted to develop these lots, and there's this local group that opposed it, and this one guy who happened to be on the planning commission later admitted that he had ghost-written an article in his homeowners association opposing the development. And then it did come out that he had introduced the main person from the opponents group at a meeting of his homeowners association. So he had some definite personal involvement anti the development. But all he says when it comes in front of the planning commission is, oh, I'm a member of the homeowners association. I happened to be there. There was an article in the homeowners association magazine about this development. I happened to be at the meeting and they came and talked to us about it. But I assure you, I'm neutral and I can participate and vote and be perfectly appropriate in this. And he did. And then it later came out that he was actually opposed to it, and of course it was a very close vote. And so the court found an unacceptable probability of actual bias. And they said since he had refused to recuse himself, the planning decision was repealed. They had to go back and do it over and pay the applicant's attorney's fees. So the city got into some significant trouble with that one. The second one is a nastier person to be around. You don't want this kind of guy for your neighbor. So this is a neighbor in the city of Hermosa Beach. And the neighbor to the Clarks wanted to tear down their house and build a new house, and it was within the city structure. It was supposed to be no more than 35 feet. They wanted to build one that was no more than 35 feet. And so this guy was a bad neighbor. He yelled, he just didn't like these people, so he'd yell at him when he was on his runs in the morning. And one time he was on the beach and he was messing around with his friends next to their kids, and they told him, hey, calm down, you're getting too close to our kids, you might hurt one of them. So then he doesn't stop, and he started making fun of the mom. And at one point, he even urinated on their house and their planter, and so they had to call the police that time. So this is not a fun person to be around. Well, he didn't like that proposal. And so he was renting an apartment a block further away from the beach. So he has no financial interest. He doesn't own the property. So he opposed the approval of the proposal by the city, and somewhere along in this process, the Planning Commission approves it, and he gets himself elected to the City Council. So then when the appeal comes up to the City Council reverses the Planning Commission. And he participates in this vote, and the court said, you've got, there's no financial interest. The Political Reform Act doesn't apply, 1090 doesn't apply. But you've still got a common law conflict of interest. You were not being fair. The city needs to go back and do that over. And I'm sure they had to pay attorney's fees too. That's the kind of thing that happens in that sort of case. So that's the sort of thing you need to watch out for in the quasi-judicial role. If you're in that kind of situation, you need to be much more careful about whether you can be fair or not. They also ask us in the training materials to talk about incompatible offices. Now this is the sort of you can't serve two masters idea, but it has a special rule in California in terms of public office. If you hold two different public offices that are incompatible with each other, you can get into trouble. If you're on a city council, the city's going to be annexing county property that's in the unincorporated area. You can't be on a county planning commission. If you're on a school district governing board, you can't be on a planning commission that has interterritorial. You can't be on the water district and the school board, if water district board and the school board, if this water district is providing water to the school district. I mean, you could fight about those kind of things. So anything where your official roles can end up fighting with each other, those are times that are going to be an issue in the incompatible office statutes. There could be specific legislative exceptions. For example, on LAFCO, we always have two county supervisors on LAFCO, and the statute just says, there's two county supervisors on LAFCO. We don't care that they're looking at annexation decisions that are going to remove territory from the unincorporated area and put them into the city. We're removing that conflict. The penalty, if you violate it, you end up forfeiting the first office. So the second one that you get sworn into is now your official office. And there's different rules for how they decide whether offices are incompatible. If the water district has power over the school district concerning new or expanded use of water, planning commissioner and state highway commissioner, where might the state want to put the highway might be incompatible with where the planning commission wants to put it. That kind of fun stuff. So again, with this kind of thing, oh, sorry, that was on the next slide. I'll get to that one in a minute. Competitive bidding is always a tough issue for special districts because I can't think of any special districts that I work with regularly that have to go to bid at all. Do any of you have any idea if you have to go to bid?
Yeah,
So, nobody's... You do have, is that a legal requirement?
Well, we were told.
And what kind of district are you?
Water.
Water districts, yeah. See, I haven't worked with water districts, so the water districts apparently have specific legal requirements, but cemetery districts, memorial districts, I know for sure, do not have any statutes that require them to use competitive bidding. Now, does that mean it's a bad idea? No. I mean, there are circumstances where you might want to do the full panoply of competitive bidding. I worked with a cemetery district in Fresno County when I was employed up there that was going to purchase the land and do the basic improvements for in addition to the cemetery. And this was like $150,000. And their board just thought, it's too much money. We don't want to get into a situation where we're just getting 3 quotes and picking one. We want to go the whole 9 yards and do the competitive bidding. And so they got documents from our county public works department and did a simple bidding package and worked with their consultant and put it together. And I mean, who knows if they got a better deal or a worse deal than if they would have just got 3 quotes. But at least they felt better about the process. They did formal sealed bids and took the lowest bid, did bid bonds and the whole thing like a city or county would have had to do. And so, you can do that kind of thing on a mini level by policy. If you're going to build a whole new building, maybe you want to go the whole way and talk to your local city or county or school district and get some bid documents and work with them to design something that works for you. Or maybe you want to just get 3 quotes. However you want to do it, do something that makes you feel good about the process, makes you feel like you've been transparent, makes it possible for you to assure your neighbors that you didn't award it to your brother-in-law just because he was your brother-in-law, and that you're going to get good work done. And so those are some things to think about in that kind of stuff. But this was the slide I was going to talk about, is think fairness and merit-based in all those kinds of decisions. Almost done. And this I thought was very weird when it first came out in the statute. It's like, I'm a lawyer, I don't do preaching, I do laws. They want us to talk about ethics principles. And so it wasn't until about the 3rd or 4th time I was giving this training that I realized, oh, they just want to talk about techniques for solving your ethical dilemmas. They don't want me to tell you how to solve it. They want to give they want me to tell you some ways to think about it. It's like, okay, that makes me feel a lot better. It's like, I'm giving you nice legal boundaries out here. Don't ask me to decide for you in here. I can't do that. I said, no, just help them decide, help them figure out how to decide. It's like, okay, I can do that. So here we are on this one. They have done research over the years in various things. This particular outfit's called the Institute for Global Ethics, and they've come up with some general ethical principles that may be described slightly differently in different communities. And it might be okay to have up to 4 wives if you're Muslim, and only 1 wife in a Christian environment, but there's still limitation, there's still a formal definition of marriage and still special rules for how you treat that, but same kind of thing. So if you boil it down, every culture worldwide throughout history has had a number of things in common that they care about. They all care about things that could be worded: trustworthiness, loyalty, responsibility, respect, fairness, compassion. All those kinds of things are important and valued worldwide by all kinds of people. And so, just one example, I'm going to be truthful and transparent. That's how I want to be as a public officer and deal with those kinds of things. But this is the important one for me, is that when I think about an ethical dilemma, or when you think about an ethical dilemma, the reason it's a dilemma is that you're having to choose between 2 different good things. Do I embezzle or do I not embezzle is easy. It's like, I shouldn't embezzle. I know that's a choice between a right and a wrong. But it becomes an ethical dilemma when it's a choice between 2 good things. I want to help my friends. I want to do what's right for the district. That's why we get a dilemma. And so that's why it's a useful technique to go through and think about it. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm dealing with 2 different right things. And I have to figure out here which one is more important and why. And so I think that's a really useful piece of this training that I didn't connect with for a long time. Is that I was really uncomfortable with teaching you how to do what's right. It's like, no, that's not my job. And then here's the example I came up with. Now, of course, in the original training materials, they had a campaign contributor wanting me to do something, but since I don't think anybody ever gives any of us campaign contributions, in fact, they have to pull teeth to get people to volunteer to be on to sign up to be elected. So we don't usually have issues with campaign contributions in special districts, so you got to come up with another example. So the one I came up with here is purely non-financial, good friend, somebody that you know well, that you love and want to do good things for, wants you to do something as a district, and comes to you as the board member and says, I want to pull strings. You're my friend, I want to pull strings with you. And you're not convinced that it's the best thing for the district. So then you've got that dilemma between the value of loyalty and the value of responsibility. Which one do I need to pay attention to in that context? And so then you have to decide which is the cost that I want to pay and how I want to deal with that. And so it's It's not the choice between good and evil that's difficult. It's the choice between two different good things. So we've got some nice thoughts just to finish off with. Now, this is always the classic one. What do you want to read about on the front page of the paper? Or it's like the one about, would you do this in front of your mom? Those are always good ones. Which one would help the public feel best about the district and how we're doing business? And now, a lot of times we're doing the best we can and the public still thinks we're awful. So we can't do anything about that. But this is just our own internal choices and how we deal with those kinds of things. So we're almost done. Takeaways here again tonight. The law sets the minimum standards. You don't have to stick to those minimums. You can be a lot higher. If you've got questions, there's places to go to ask. You can look at those Institute for Legal Government materials. My boss just got back from the CSAC conference, and they have some various things that they offer. They've got their website here. They've got a little flyer on open government laws, and I think all these things are on their website. They've got a little brochure. This one's a nice cardstock. You can probably order 15 copies. Ethics law principles for public servants. They even spelled principles correctly. We've given you some handouts in the back of my section of the packet that talks. It's a copy of some of these things: ethics law, compliance, best practices, some things that you can do on that. And then I love this last little thing that Lynn came up with. I guess if you can't be a good example, you'll have to be a horrible warning. And so I don't want any of us to be horrible warnings. We want to be good examples. I'll have to find out who Catherine Baird is. I'm not familiar with that name. So once again, now that you've finished it, and we'll pretend it really was 2 hours. Got a little bit shorter than that, but we'll treat it as the full 2 hours. Don't leave without getting your proof of participation certificate. And make sure that if you're going to end up filing it 2 places, that you only file a copy and keep the original for yourself. And any questions? We do have one in the back. Can we get this gentleman the handheld mic?
Just for clarification, because some of our board members were at an ethics training a little over a year ago, Lindsay. And we asked the question, because we have a nonprofit organization in the community, and if we could serve on 2 boards, as a board member for the water district and as a board member for the nonprofit organization.
Yeah. So the question is, does it count as an incompatible office if you're on a public board and then you want to be on a private board as well? No. The doctrine is actually incompatible public offices. It has to be 2 things that count as public offices. Now there are things that are not board members that count as public offices. A police officer has a little piece of individual government authority. So it might not be possible to be a police officer and a board member of certain overlapping jurisdictions, or the fire marshal. If you're a fire department chief, you might not be able to be on your local school board, that kind of thing. So there are some technical employment positions that count as public offices, but they would be with a public employer. What we do end up with in the county in particular is board members, county supervisors, who have their pet charities and are on the boards of nonprofits. And what you have to watch out for on those is government grants. And then you have to look at that in terms of the financial conflict of interest rules, and how are we dealing with the grant rules for the county handing out money to nonprofits. But as long as your agency isn't handing out money to a nonprofit, then it's not going to be an incompatible public office to be involved with a nonprofit. It might be a financial thing if you're working for them, or getting, if that's your job, then you might end up under financial rules. But that's not just being on the board is not an incompatible public office.
Thank you.
Other questions? But once again, thank you all for coming, and thank you for hanging on until the very end tonight. Again, we sure appreciate you guys coming and being so interested in wanting to do a good job as special district board members. Don't leave without getting your certificate, and we will hope to see you again next year.